I'm not going to support a lazy fat woman like you, my husband screamed, not knowing I had just inherited millions of dollars and was now the owner of the company where he worked. The words cut through the dining room like a dull, rusty knife, the kind that doesn't slice cleanly but leaves an infected wound of shame. Victoria didn't respond. She couldn't. Her lips were sealed by trembling pride and the habit of staying silent. She sat with her back straight, eyes downcast, watching the mashed potatoes grow cold on her plate. Across from her, Stephen, her husband of 12 years, finished pouring himself a glass of red wine with an arrogance that showed even in the sound of crystal hitting the table. Victoria was 38, but felt twice that age. Her face, still beautiful under the warm dining room light, was tired, marked with small lines that came not from time, but from pain. She'd become a mother at 26. Her son Matthew was born with mild cerebral palsy requiring constant care, therapy, medications, and love. So much love. Victoria had thrown herself into that role completely, setting aside her dreams, her business administration career, her youth, her friends, her movie nights, her freedom. Her mother, Dorothy, sat in her wheelchair at the far end, watching silently. At 66, her face was marked by years of struggle, poverty, and wounded pride. Same thing every day, Stephen said, wiping his mouth with a napkin he then carelessly threw onto his plate. Every single day. Mashed potatoes, boiled meat, and that victim face of yours. Victoria swallowed hard. The lump in her throat hurt more than any blow. She glanced at Matthew, who sat in his adaptive chair playing with one of his sensory toys. At 11, Matthew didn't speak much, but he understood everything. He felt every shout, every insult. I'm tired, you understand? Stephen looked at her with eyes blazing with rage. Tired of supporting a woman who can't even warm up dinner properly. Tired of coming home from the office to see this house in shambles. Tired of a mother-in-law in a wheelchair who isn't even my mother. Stop it, Stephen. Victoria suddenly shouted so loudly that even Matthew dropped his toy. Stephen looked at her with surprise, not fear, but mockery. Look at that, the dead woman came back to life. Dorothy raised a trembling hand. Not in front of the boy, please. And why not, Dorothy? Stephen stood up, pressing his hands on the table. Want me to keep playing the understanding husband? The hero? You know what they say about me at work? That I'm a poor fool who has to rush home to take care of his dysfunctional family. I'm sick of it. Victoria also stood up. The mashed potatoes remained there, untouched, like a metaphor for her life, soft gray, shapeless. If your family embarrasses you so much, nobody's forcing you to stay. And who's going to support this house? You? The disabled mother? The special needs kid? Don't make me laugh. A heavy silence took over the room. Dorothy pressed her lips until they disappeared. Matthew began to cry without sound, large, hot tears falling uncontrollably. At that moment, Victoria's phone vibrated on the table. She picked it up almost reflexively, grateful for any excuse to escape this hell. Unknown number. She hesitated for a second, then answered. Yes. A man's voice measured and formal. Mrs. Victoria Williams? Yes, that's me. I'm calling on behalf of Morrison and Associates law firm. We need you to come in first thing tomorrow morning. It's regarding the estate of Mr. Alexander Morrison. Victoria frowned. There must be a mistake. I don't know any Alexander Morrison. Mr. Morrison legally recognized you as his daughter before passing away. You have been designated as the sole heir to his estate. Victoria went blank. Stephen continued talking in the background, though she no longer heard the words. Only a buzzing, an electric current running through her body. Her mother, Dorothy, stared at her intently. Her eyes said what her lips couldn't. It's true. She hung up the phone. What was that about? Stephen asked sarcastically. Did they call to offer you a job as a professional dishwasher? Victoria looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. She didn't respond. Who was it? Dorothy asked in a hoarse voice. A lawyer. They say I inherited something. Something? From who? Alexander Morrison. Stephen let out a dry laugh. Morrison Corp? The old millionaire who was in the news for dying alone? What does he have to do with you? That's what I'm wondering. Dorothy looked down. A slight tremor in her hands gave her away. Mom, do you know something? It's not the time. Yes, it is. Stephen slammed the table. Is someone going to explain what's happening? Matthew started coughing, choking on his own tears. Victoria rushed to him, held him tight, cradled him against her chest. It's okay, my love. Mommy's here. Mommy's not going anywhere. Stephen grabbed his plate and smashed it against the floor. I'm sick of this. Sick of this farce, this house, this life. I'm not going to support a lazy fat woman like you. The silence was immediate. Dense, absolute. Victoria turned slowly. Dorothy was breathing heavily. Matthew looked at her as if expecting something, a word, a gesture, a sign. But Victoria just smiled. Small, minimal, a curve of lips that no one understood, but that changed everything. You're right, she said without emotion. You won't be supporting me anymore. Stephen blinked. What did you say? Tomorrow I'm leaving. You can keep your food, your ego, and your silence. Where do you think you're going? Victoria looked at her mother, then at her son. Somewhere I can breathe. And without saying another word, she took Matthew in her arms and went upstairs. Stephen stood there with the remains of the plate on the floor, wine spilled on the tablecloth, and a silence that for the first time didn't obey him. The truth unveiled. That night Victoria didn't sleep. While the world around her sank into darkness, she prepared the essentials. Matthew's medical documents, her own university records, the old agenda where she once wrote down her dreams, the same ones she'd put on hold since motherhood, marriage, and reality chained her to a life she hadn't chosen. At 5 o'clock in the morning, without making a sound, she went downstairs with a suitcase in each hand and Matthew sleeping in her arms. Her mother waited at the door in silence, with a blanket over her legs and wet eyes. Victoria nodded. Dorothy knew it was time. They called a taxi, and when the car stopped in front of the house, they didn't look back. Stephen slept deeply with the TV on, an empty wine bottle next to the bed, and the false certainty that he had won. Victoria rented a small apartment in a peripheral neighborhood, simple but clean. 3 narrow rooms, a bathroom without hot water, damp walls, but a window from which you could see a piece of sky without electrical wires. It was enough. Dorothy was the first to break the silence. Are you going to tell me once and for all what Alexander Morrison has to do with you? Victoria looked at her from the kitchen doorway, where she was heating water to prepare powdered milk for Matthew. Is it true what the lawyer said? Dorothy looked down. The tremor in her hands wasn't from the cold. I was very young, 19 years old. I worked as a secretary in an office. Your biological father owned that company. His name was Alexander. He was married and I was a fool. Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. He abandoned me. Asked me to abort. I refused. He fired me. Never looked for me again. But his wife died years later, and apparently guilt brought him remorse. He investigated, found you, legally recognized you recently. He didn't want you to know while he was alive. That's why his will is so peculiar. Victoria closed her eyes for a moment. My real father was a millionaire, one of the richest men in the country, owner of Morrison Corporation. The name now carried different weight. Morrison Corp was a technology and infrastructure company with hundreds of employees, government contracts, and offices in several countries. A powerhouse. And now, according to that lawyer, she was the sole heir. But it wasn't the wealth that kept her awake. It was the fact that Stephen worked there, in that empire she had just inherited. The transformation. Over the following weeks, Victoria moved in silence. She started therapy with a psychologist named Dr. Sarah, a specialist in women victims of emotional abuse. She exercised at home, ate better. She learned to breathe before answering, to say no without fear, to recognize herself in the mirror without shame. It wasn't quick, it wasn't easy. But each passing day, the face that the reflection gave back was more hers, less foreign, less molded by Stephen. Matthew was enrolled in a new physical therapy clinic. Thanks to the inherited resources, she could pay for sessions without depending on anyone. His smile improved. He began making sounds he hadn't pronounced in years. Dorothy, from her chair by the window, knitted in silence. She no longer needed to speak. She knew change was happening and that it was real. One morning, Morrison Corp's lawyer sent a package by courier. Inside were legal documents, deeds, stock shares, and a handwritten letter signed by Alexander Morrison. I failed you as a father, but I returned to you the power that was always yours. Not so you'll forgive me, but so you can decide what to do with my name. Victoria didn't cry. She didn't feel nostalgia, she felt direction. She requested a meeting with Morrison Corp's executives. It was Ryan who arranged it. Ryan, her childhood friend, the only one who didn't disappear when everything became difficult. Ryan appeared at the apartment door with a box of fresh fruit and a nervous smile. "Can I come in?" Victoria let him in without saying anything. "I heard about Alexander," he said. "I found out through a colleague. Morrison had a secret daughter, an heir. When I heard your name, I couldn't believe it. Now you know. What are you going to do?" "What no one ever did for me, seek justice." Ryan was a financial analyst, but also an honest, loyal man. One of those who never got tangled in the mud, even when everyone around him did. He revealed that Stephen worked in the project's area, that he was climbing positions rapidly, that there were rumors he was being considered for operations manager. A position with access to million-dollar contracts, all thanks to inflated reports, data manipulation, and an enviable ability to appear to know more than he actually did. "And something else," Ryan said, looking at the floor. "He has a relationship with Jessica. She's new recent graduate, pretty intelligent. She spends time in his office." Victoria didn't blink. "Since when?" "About 6 months, maybe more." "How do you know?" "I've seen photos, conversations. I heard him bragging in a meeting. He boasts about what he has, what's lacking at home. He calls you dead weight." Victoria clenched her fists. Not in rage, but in strength. "I want to enter the company. Not as president. Not yet. I want to see who's who from below. I want to meet the people who work there, the ones Stephen steps on, the ones nobody sees." The investigation. Ryan helped her organize discreet visits. She presented herself as an external consultant in personnel evaluation under an alternative name. She went to headquarters, toured offices, spoke with cleaning staff, technicians, receptionists. Nobody knew who she really was, not even Jessica, who greeted her with an educated smile without knowing she was face to face with the legitimate wife of the man she slept with in the afternoons. Stephen didn't see her. Or if he did, he didn't recognize her. She had gained a little weight, yes, but her clothes were different, her posture had changed. She was no longer the woman hunched over by guilt. Now she was a confident figure with measured words and meaningful silences. During her second visit, an employee took her to the project's area. There was Stephen explaining on a whiteboard a supposed material savings that nobody understood, but everyone pretended to comprehend. "As you can see," he said, "we managed to reduce concrete costs by 27% through intelligent redistribution of foundations. We are pure efficiency." Victoria stayed in the shadows behind a column, observing. She listened to him speak. He used pompous words, confusing statistics, a condescending tone. He felt powerful. A director, engineer Mark Williams, recognized her not by her face, but by her name on the security badge. "Excuse me, are you the new president?" "Not yet," Victoria replied. "For now, I'm just an observer." Williams swallowed hard, understood, and said nothing more. At the end of the day, Victoria was invited to an internal performance analysis meeting. Ryan accompanied her. She sat in the back, behind polarized glass in a room adjacent to the main hall. Nobody knew she was there. Stephen entered first. He wore an expensive suit, strong cologne, rehearsed smile. He greeted with back slaps, empty laughter, and false promises. "Today we're going to present the quarter's results," he said while connecting his laptop to the projector. "I think everyone will be impressed." Victoria watched him in silence. What she felt wasn't rage. It was pity because everything he believed he had wasn't his. It was borrowed, stolen, fake. While Stephen spoke, Victoria opened her notebook and wrote a single phrase. "He has no idea." And she smiled not with mockery but with certainty, because at that moment she understood that true power wasn't in shouting, hitting tables, or humiliating. True power was knowing who you are and who you never need to be again. The reckoning. Victoria called for an urgent meeting with all employees and executives, a general assembly in the main auditorium. What was going to happen there wasn't a simple announcement. It was the fall of an empire built on lies. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the auditorium lights dimmed. More than 300 people occupied their seats, murmuring among themselves. Nobody knew exactly what was happening, but the atmosphere smelled of something imminent. Stephen arrived dressed like he owned the world. New suit, silk tie, arrogant smile. He greeted several with back slaps, sat in the front row, and crossed his legs with shamelessness. He had no idea what was about to happen. Victoria walked onto the stage amid murmurs. She wore a black outfit without ornaments. Her face was serene, not a drop of makeup, not a smile. She took the microphone firmly. "Good morning. I officially introduce myself to you. My name is Victoria Williams Morrison. I am the president of this company." There was a silence of astonishment. Some were left speechless. Others turned toward Stephen, who now had a face rigid as marble. A whisper spread like fire through the auditorium. Victoria continued without pause. "During the last few weeks, I have been observing the internal functioning of the company, not as president, but as one more employee. From within, I have walked through your hallways, reviewed files, listened to conversations. What I discovered forces me to speak today before you with evidence, with truths, and with consequences." She signaled to Ryan. On the giant screen appeared the first video. Stephen negotiating with the illegal supplier, receiving envelopes, laughing while explaining how to inflate budgets. Then the recording of the threat to the board. "If they take me out of the game, we all fall." Later, a chain of emails demonstrating the use of false identities to justify non-existent overtime hours. Faces transformed as evidence appeared. Some employees covered their mouths with their hands, others took notes desperately. Nobody spoke, nobody dared. Victoria walked across the stage as if each step were an act of liberation. "And it doesn't end there," she said with a firm voice. Mr. Stephen Parker was also reported for harassment by multiple employees. Reports that were ignored out of fear, manipulation, or protection. Those people will have their voice today. She paused. She looked directly at Stephen, who was now white as paper, sweating, clenching his fists on his knees. "What you built with lies today crumbles with truth." Stephen stood up abruptly. "Don't do this to me, Victoria. Not here." Victoria didn't look away. "Not here? Where then?" "At home, where you lied. In bed, where you cheated. At the company, where you stole." Stephen jumped onto the stage, tried to grab the microphone from her. Ryan intervened. 2 security agents held him by the arms. "You're nothing without me. I picked you up from the trash. I made you a woman." Victoria took the microphone one last time. "This isn't the end. It's the beginning of a clean, fair, and humane place. And to achieve that, corruption must go. Cruelty must go. And you, Stephen, must go." The agents escorted him to the exit. Nobody said goodbye. Nobody approached. Jessica, in the last row, lowered her head. When Stephen disappeared through the door, Victoria looked at Jessica. "Before closing this assembly, there's something else that must be said." Jessica stood up. Her face was pale, hands trembling. She walked to the stage and took the microphone with frozen fingers. "I'm pregnant. And everyone thought it was Stephen's. It's not." There was a collective sigh. "The father is Ryan." Victoria lowered her eyelids. There was no rage. No scandal. Just a knot that slowly untied. As if she already knew. New beginnings. The days that followed passed between dense silences and decisive actions. Victoria didn't take refuge in triumph. Didn't let herself be intoxicated by public glory. Instead, she sat alone in her office, wrote a letter, and convened a meeting with the company's oldest members. "I'm going to establish a special program," she announced. "A support network for single mothers, children with disabilities, and employees in vulnerable situations. It will be called Project Matthew." The room fell silent. Some exchanged surprised looks. Nobody expected it. Victoria didn't ask for their opinion, just clear instructions. Automatic donations from her salary, funds for scholarships, extended medical coverage, clinic partnerships. Within 2 weeks, Project Matthew had a headquarters, an operational team, and dozens of beneficiaries. Samuel, a young man with Asperger's whom she'd met at Matthew's therapy clinic, was named technical coordinator of the project. His intelligence, sensitivity, and sense of duty made him indispensable. The ultimate test. Months later, Matthew's condition worsened. The treatment required in Europe was Victoria's only hope. As they prepared for the journey, Dorothy's health declined rapidly. The night before leaving, Dorothy took Victoria's hand. "Thank you for being stronger than me." Victoria could only tell her she loved her, and watched her go with the peace she never had in life. In Europe, Matthew's treatment began well, but complications arose. A medically induced coma became necessary. As Victoria sat by his bedside, watching machines breathe for her son, she felt the weight of every decision she'd made. "I love you, my life," she whispered to Matthew. "You're going to rest a little. When you wake up, I'll be here like always." "Will you sing to me when I wake up?" Matthew asked with a thread of voice. "Yes, my love. I'll sing to you every day if necessary." Redemption. Weeks later, Matthew opened his eyes. His first word was "Mommy." It was like the world lit up again. Meanwhile, Stephen had been found collapsed on the street, hospitalized with pneumonia, malnourished, hypothermic. Nobody claimed him. Nobody knew where he lived. When Victoria learned of this, she felt no satisfaction, only a distant echo of compassion. She visited him once, leaving a letter Matthew had written before his trip. "What you did has no fix," she told Stephen without harshness. "But you can start over. Not with me. Not with Matthew, with yourself." The final chapter. Victoria eventually stepped down as president of Morrison Corp., dedicating herself to Project Matthew. She moved near the ocean with Matthew and lived quietly, writing, cooking, walking. One morning, Matthew brought her an old notebook and showed her a page written with clumsy but determined strokes. "My mom isn't a lazy fat woman. She's the bravest woman in the world." Victoria's voice broke. She hugged him with force, with tenderness, with everything she had. And she knew in that instant that everything had been worth it. Because forgiving isn't forgetting, it's freeing yourself from those who hurt you. And so, in a corner of the world where the sea sings instead of screams, where silence doesn't hurt but embraces, light was finally born. What did you think of this story? Many people are living similar situations. We hope joy also lives in your heart. If this story moved you, share it. Be part of the change. Tell us in the comments what you would have done in such a situation. Where are you watching from? We'd love to read from you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Every gesture inspires us to keep creating deep and real stories every day.